Okay, good evening, everyone. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Good evening,
we've got
Ezekiel.
two.
I can hear. I can
Okay,
hear
thank
you.
you thank you very much. I don't know whether our guests can hear me. Identify with him.
Okay, well, good evening, Ezekiel. I can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, my name is Ezekiel. I'm the communication officer for Senate of the Culture and Women Initiative Support, and I'll be the one to control all the technical facilities for this webinar. And I wish you guys the best. Ricardo, you can take over from here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Ezekiel, and good evening, Yahuza. Hello, can you hear me? Ezekiel, can
I
you
can
hear
hear.
me?
I can hear you. Good evening. I'm having a network glitch from my end, but I was able to resolve.
Okay, yeah. Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Rifka Tulale. I'm from Zenith of Girl, Child, and Women Initiative Support. So it's another week for us, our weekly webinar weekly series. And today we will discuss on the topic child labor and street begging with our guest, Yahuza Ismail, from CATAI. So I'll give him the opportunity to speak to us. You're welcome, Yahuza.
Okay, welcome, Rifkatu. Good evening once again. It's my
Yeah,
pleasure
thank
to
you.
be part of this wonderful discussion where I will create an awareness and to be part of these wonderful sessions to talk on child child labor and street begging and how we can curtail to mitigate the impact of child labor and street begging. My name is Yahuza Ismail. I work with Center for Advocacy, Transparency and Accountability Initiative. I am the education manager working with CATAI.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Yahuza, for that wonderful introduction. So, our audience kindly sit back, and I assure you that you have a wonderful discussion because of the issue of child labor and street begging is one of the major issues we are facing in Borno State. So, today we'll be discussing around this issue to see how we are going to mitigate these challenges and to contribute to reducing the rate of street begging and child labor in Borno State. So thank you. So Yahuza, before we start, I would like you to give us briefly on child labor and street begging for the sake of our audience.
Okay, thank you so much, Rufkatu, once again. So when we talk
Yeah,
about child labor is simply means exposing people to other things beyond, like, which is far much more beyond their age. Most especially people that are, according to the UN classification of child and Nigerian classification of child labor and child act in the
yeah,
2003 Child Right Act, any person below the age of 18 is a child. Therefore, engaging a child in any activity that is beyond his age or beyond his capacity, most
yeah.
especially for him to go and work to support his parent or to support the family, it simply means a child labor. And we assume each and every child has the right to enjoy his childhood, whereby he have the right to have access to education, he has the right to have access to health and any other things. I believe a child is someone who is under the custody of his parent, not his parents are the one responsible of taking care of him, not the child responsible of taking care of his parent. So that simply means child labor in a very short form.
Okay, thank you so much. So about street begging.
Okay. Street begging is actually
Yeah,
exposing children to go out and seek for and beg for survival, whereby they will be going and loitering around the streets begging for people to support them with either cash or something in kind, maybe foodstuff or money for them to survive. And due to the insurgency we are having in Borno State, a lot of young children are being engaged into child labor, whereby they are engaged in roaming the street for them to go and beg to ask for something for them to survive on, instead of them to be in school, instead of them to have a better education and to have a better health. They are spending all their entire day and their time on the street, roaming the street and begging, which at some point some of these children are even exposed to danger and harm, whereby they can easily be kicked by a car, they can easily be kicked by a moving motorcycle. These children can easily be kidnapped to go and maybe used for rituals and any other things. All these are what consequences of child labor to the street.
okay, thank you so much, Yahuza, for that discussion. So right now I will go straight to our question without making wasting much time. So Yahuza, what do you think is the key factor contributing to child labor in Borno State?
Well, the major contributor of child labor in Borno State, I can start by saying the first number one major factor and causes of child labor in the state is insurgency. As a result of civil unrest and insurgency, which happen as a result of man-made, we have anthropogenic and non-anthropogenic causes of disaster in the state. So The major one is the insurgency. The insurgency has exposed a lot of people to a lot of danger, which leads to migration. People are now migrated, leaving their ancestral home as IDP, internally displaced people. People are exposed to a lot of danger, and poverty is another factor of engaging a lot of people into child labor. Then the other thing is economic, the bad economic. The situation of our economic is very bad in the sense that people are still exposed to child labor and street begging. As a result of that, the insurgency has contributed has largely contributed to child labor and well, sorry, I'm having a network glitch from my end. So
Yeah.
people don't have access to quality education, don't have access to quality of living, don't have access to food, shelter, and clothing. These are some of the major things that expose young people to engage into child labor, whereby parents are now engaging into child labor to support their children and to provide a daily bread into their homes. As a result of that, people are now engaging into child labor, which leads to migration. People are now migrating, leaving their ancestral home as IDP, internally displaced people. Then the other thing is insecurity. People are now exposed to insecurity.
I guess Yahuza is having network issues.
Well, sorry, I'm actually using my phone to to
Okay.
connect to my computer, so I'm having a call, so I have to end the call. Okay, sorry, apologies. I'm now coming back. So one of the major factors I've already mentioned three. I talk around poverty, I talk around insurgency, I also discuss around bad economy. Then the other thing is climate change, which happens as a result of the natural causes. People are now migrated, are forced to migrate, leaving some of their locations for them to look for a way of survival. Example, when we look at the Lake Chad basins, a lot of thousands of people are been living and surviving there, having their businesses and serving as a source of their income for them to provide a daily bread into their homes. As a result of the climate change and shrinking of the Lake Chad, a lot of people have to displace and leave the locations to migrate to other places. Urban rural migrations as a result of push and pull factor is also a major contributor of street begging. So street begging in a nutshell, the major causes and major contributor of street begging and child labor is when people don't have access to shelter, don't have access to food, don't have access to standard of living in the sense of maybe for them to access medical and healthcare facilities. And as a citizens and everybody have a right to have access to maybe shelter, to have access to food and clothing. When people are having that, most especially as a result of the poverty, usually expose people to street begging and child labor.
Okay. Thank you so much, Yahuza. You have speak a lot around this. I wanted to ask you how has it increased? But in your answers, you have given us how street begging and child labor has increases over the years. Because if we look at it, before the year of 2014, 2010, there are not much child labor and begging like this, especially after COVID-19. There are a lot of issues of street begging and child labor. So you have already answered that. So we'll just move straight into the next question. How does poverty and psychosocial economic plays a role in pushing children into street and child labor and street
Okay,
begging?
okay, well, poverty, please can you come again?
Okay, I said how does poverty, we know that a lot of people are facing the issues of poverty. A lot of the people are facing challenges because of this poverty. So, how does poverty push and psychosocial economic factor, sorry, play a role in pushing children out on the streets to beg and child labor?
Okay, okay, well, thank you. Actually, poverty and socio-economic factor play a role in pushing children into labor and street begging. In the sense that we have two things, most especially in the rural community. People are being forced to migrate to the urban communities as a result of the push and pull factors. When people are exposed to the urban communities, they tend to engage in a lot of hard work for them to for economic survival, whereby a consequences of that, they are often forced to leave and walk in the street, as they lack access to basic requirements such as food, shelter, and other things. And these children become street workers and vendors, in the sense that some of the parents are even asking or sending their children to other states for them to go and engage into hard labor, whereby at the end of the day this money will be paid to their parent, which they can be used for their other survival as a result of the what as a result of the poverty. As a result of the poverty and street begging and child labor, some of the people are even being engaged as a sex workers in some of the locations, whereby they will be the one taking care and taking burden of the family. And according to entirely sincerely accordingly, what is supposed to be is that the parents should be the one taking care of their children, not the children taking care of their parent. So whenever these children will be exposed and engaged into child labor and street begging, they normally have they normally lack time and have access to some of their quality education and some of their basic things in life as a young people for them to enjoy their childhood.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you so much, Yahuza, for talking about this. Yes, a lot of parents see their children that they should play roles in providing for the family. I could remember I once had a radio program where one of the parents called me and said I shouldn't emphasize on children should not be sent out on the street to hawk, saying that children should play a role in also providing for the factors. So looking at this, do you think we have in Borno State a legal framework in Borno State in addressing child labor and street begging?
Okay, well, for me to discuss more around that is, so for us, one of the major challenges that actually lead to the increased number of child labor and street begging is the insurgency. This has been a major factor whereby a lot of people lose their major resources. So in Borno State, the legal frameworks we have in Borno State is Child Protection Bill, which was signed by the Executive Governor of Borno State in 11 January, I think around 2022, which was science. The child protection bill is speaking around child right. How can we protect the right of our children? How can they have access to some of their basic needs? How can the children be protected in the sense that they can be able to harness to their full potential? How can these children be protected and be provided access to what that suits their interest and many more? Then currently, I think around 2023, we are actually working on validations to see how the government and other stakeholders can engage into the child right bill. I think is it child right act. Sorry, child right act, whereby the government officials are being engaged into trainings which was sponsored by Save the Children for them to understand and know that children across various communities have their own rights, and how can the government help in protecting and advocating for their right for them to have an equitable and quality life and quality educations, whereby we engage a lot of stakeholders. We engage the policy makers. We are currently engaging the educational stakeholders, our religious leaders, and other ministries and parastatals that are working toward ensuring children have access to some of their basic needs of life. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. So I guess this is one of the legal framework we have. So Yahuza, looking at how the issues of street begging and child labor, what are the strategy can we use to raise awareness and educate community? Because if you look at it, it's like mostly if you walk around Maiduguri, you look at most community are facing this issue of child labor and street begging. So what are the strategy we should use to raise awareness to communities about the dangers and consequences of child labor and street begging?
Okay. Well, when we look at how we can raise awareness for people for them to understand the dangers and consequences of child labor, whenever we are talking around child labor, street begging, and many other things, these are actually a contextual issues, and these are very sensitive issues sometimes when we look at these issues. So, assuming when we are talking around the Child Right Act and child protection bills, other people are having different perspective and different thoughts on that. I will need to consider the other people at the grassroots communities, not only in the urban communities. People at the grassroots communities that do not have access to some of their basic needs of life is actually something that is devastating. For someone who solidly believes in his children and actually put all his expectation on his child for survival, it will be very hard for him to understand such. So for us to have a better strategy in addressing these issues, that is what we call ethical extensionisms. There are things that are already in a form of culture and other religious perspective that is actually by guiding all these principles and all these thoughts. When we talk about child rights, some are even saying that I born a child, how can I be the one maybe pleading by my child or for me to work on serving his own interest and many more. While these are things that they need to understand that as a child, we did not talk about a child to go against his parent. So we need to include our religious leaders, whereby they can be using to create awareness in some of their sermons, maybe in the churches and in the mosques. You can also use some of the educational stakeholders and educational leaders, people who are well respected in the communities, who are being realized by some of their services and activities they are conducted in their communities, for them to raise awareness, for people to understand these are some of the things that are important for them to know. We can actually engage in a media campaign where we can be raising awareness using our maybe in a form of cartoons, in a form of infographic, in a form of emoticons and many more, where we can raise awareness to a lot of people. We can engage in jingles, we can engage in fiscal awareness creation, we can engage in radio programming, whereby we can be raising awareness using our radio stations. And also we can also engage by actually holding our leaders accountable for them to be responsible in addressing and delivering their duties across the state.
Okay, thank you so much, Yahuza. I like the idea that you said we should engage with the religion and traditional leaders, because I guess religious and traditional leaders are the custodians of law. Mostly the people in the community and the grassroots people in the community often listen to the traditional and religious leaders more than other people. So I think by engaging these religions and traditional leaders, we will have a better and change in mitigating the street begging and child labor. So what are the
Yes.
next question is, yeah, what
And
are
another
the
thing, I'm sorry, one
yeah,
other thing I think we need to do is we should also engage women in advocating for this, for them to understand the consequences and the effect. When we look at the number of people that are engaged in street begging and child labor, there are a lot of incidents and a lot of scenarios that happen whereby you will hear that a child is being forced to go and hawk on the streets. It's not because maybe due to the poverty they are having maybe in their family, maybe the parents are trying their all best, maybe the father is trying his possible. Let me not be gender let me
yeah,
not be
yeah,
gender selfish in my conversation actually.
yeah,
So there are some scenarios whereby you will find out that a father is trying his possible best to provide for the family, while the stepmother is engaging maybe as a result of she's not the mother of the child, she'll be engaging the child into street hawking and many more. And when you currently look at the people that are actually engaging on the street begging, you can see we have a lot of number of women who are engaged in the child labor, sorry, in the street begging and children. And these are the people that are more exposed, and they are normally people that are more harm and more dangerous whenever there are conflict or there are issues for them to be exposed on the street.
yeah. Yes, thank you
So I
so
think
much
by
for
engaging women in advocacy, for them to raise awareness to some of their other colleagues, for them to realize the dangers and consequences of the street begging and child labor, it can be a great avenue for us to address the issues and mitigate the harm and consequences of child labor across our communities.
Yeah, thank you so much for elaborating on that. I guess this is one of the major issues that we are facing. A lot of children are going out on the streets to beg because they are staying with their stepmothers or the rest. And while others, if you look at the numbers of women that are begging on the street, some of them are not even people living with disabilities. Yeah, they are not people living with disabilities, and they can work, because I see a lot of people with living with disability who don't go out to street to beg, but they actually sit back at home, do work, and more than others that are even able. So I guess we should engage more women into all this. So my next question is, looking at this thing, we know that there are potential consequences to this. So what are the effects of child labor and street begging, on the long term effect of street and child begging, like the physical, the mental, the psychosocial development of the children? What are the long term effects of this on the children?
Okay, well, actually, the long-term effect and consequences of child labor and street begging is the fact that most at times when children are already exposed to the streets, they actually lack social morals, whereby they are already exposed to a lot of harms in the sense that they lack social morals. One, number two, it can even lead to death. In the sense that I saw a lot of scenario whereby a car hits a child who is trying to beg on the street, which leads to him losing his life, causing a lot of injuries and many more. To some extent, if a child is already engaged into child labor activity and street begging, it's becoming very hard for him to continue with his education or for him to further his educations. Sometimes children are even exposed to danger such as drug abuse, whereby they will go and take hard drugs for them to be able to work, for them to earn more money. And sometimes these children will are only our eyes are just blind in the sense that they are only looking for money. Even if things are going to be very dangerous to their harm physically or mentally or psychologically, they'll just go ahead and just face it, believing that the hard way is the only way. So I think these are some of the major consequences and long-term effects of child labor. At times it can even lead a child to engage into stealing activity. A child can easily join a bad group such as gang groups and many more, so that he believed that whenever I go home, I am the one taking care of my family, I'm the responsible for taking care of my family. So this I speak this around most of the boys. Actually, when I look at the perspective of the women, it even leads to gender-based violence issues, whereby a lot of children are being used as sex workers, while other people are even used for ritualists, whereby some are even engaged into other activities that are actually against the teachings and against our morals of our community and societies, and even against the Nigerians law at large. So I think these are some of the major issues the that is behind the street begging and child labor.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much for elaborating on this. I guess you have speak a lot on the characters of children that are begging, the long-term effects of street begging and child labor. Because if you look at the children that grown up in the street and the children that grow up at home with love and care tend to have different character and social moral. And some of these children, like as you said, that it's very hard for them to further their education. There are some of these children, even if you are willing to take them out of the streets for them to go to further their education, I don't think they no longer want to further their education. They prefer to be on that street and be begging. So these are the yes long-term effects that is having on children. So we'll be moving to our last question right now. So looking at this thing, the child labor and the street begging, definitely whether we like it or not, it's affecting each and everyone in Borno State in one way or the other. So how can stakeholders, including government, civil society, the national NGO, international NGO, and UN, come together to address the root causes of this child labor and street begging?
Okay, as I earlier stated in my introduction on the major factors and causes of street begging and child labor, I discuss more around poverty. I talk around poverty, I talk about natural and man-made disasters such as insurgencies, migration, displacement, bad economy, and many more. So for us to address all this, to address the root cause, I think if whenever we are addressing an issue, when we are unable to address the root cause, it's like for somebody to kill a snake and forget to cut the neck to the head.
Yeah.
Sorry. So actually, it
Yes.
can bite you again while trying to kill the snake. So the major causes and ways for the government to address such issues is to create an employability for young people, most especially women, improve skills acquisition centers, and also train people for them to learn. Now we are at the era of skills rather than certificates. So people should learn other skills for them to be able to do something and sell, for them to provide something for the family. And also the government can advocate and create a free system of education whereby a lot of young people can be able to access educations and employability and market opportunities, whereby women will be engaged, they will be trained, they will be having access to some of their basic needs. And the government should also work toward providing access and supporting the small and medium enterprises, and also supporting young entrepreneurs and young people for them to be self-reliant, for them to be employability and have other skills that they can be able to employ and work to contribute to the national economy. And the government should also work toward providing a security, strengthening the security systems in the state and the country at large, whereby people can be able to access some of their farmland. Some use the farmland as some of their major sources of income. And the government should also work toward addressing the climate change issues, whereby young people can be able to have access to some of their major sources of income. Then the other stakeholders across the communities and societies is that they should actually work on deck in coming up with policies on how they can address such issues. I can remember Kaduna State government come up with a policy, I think around, whereby he come out publicly and state to the people that any person that he caught his child when it was a school hour, he is going to meet the parent in the court, whereby they will go and face the judgment. He tried all his possible best to make the education to be free in Kaduna. So I don't know how effective it is, as I did not follow more around the conversations and the processes he made as of then. So if the government can do that, I think young people can have more access to some of these. And when people understand the dangers and consequences of child labor, I don't think they will be engaging their young people, their children and their youths into child labor activities. And most especially when the government come up with policies and stand on their deck to address such issues, I think this is also going to go a long way. Because most especially people are engaged into child labor as a result of what? Poverty. When government are able to address the poverty, when we talk about poverty, people usually look around poverty as people who are unable to spend or get a single dollar in a day, while poverty is far beyond people having a dollar in a day. When we look at the multinational index, it speaks more around poverty. When we discuss around poverty, we need to understand how was the percentage of the people that graduated in maybe reached their university level or graduated in the primary school or secondary school level in the country. We also look at how many people were they able to cook their food using the LPG, not the firewood or animal dungs. We also consider where do we sleep, what are our source of incomes. All these are part of the poverty for us to be able to understand and measure, to know how far are the maybe issues around poverty of people is. And the government can also come up with a way of creating a database whereby they can be able to identify and know the number of people that are living in abject poverty by maybe knowing their socio-economic activities and maybe accessing and knowing the level of income they actually have in some of the communities. I think by so doing, the government will be able to address the root causes of all this, and we are going to achieve a wonderful and great outcome at the end of the day.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much, Yahuza, on elaborating on more of this. I think one of the major causes that leads to child labor and street begging is poverty. So, as you said, the government should look around and how they can be able to see that poverty is being eradicated among the people in community by providing life skill for the young people, women, including the people that are less privileged. And I also like this idea that you said in Kaduna, the government okay make a law that if they find your child begging or hawking on the street during the school hours, then definitely the parents will be summoned to court. I guess if this happened in Borno State, a lot of child begging and street begging will reduce because you can't walk in the street of Meduguri without a day without meeting 20 to 30 children on the street begging. So this is one of the
Yeah.
issues happening in Borno State. So thank you so much. We have come to the end of our questions for today. So let me ask Ezekiel if our audience have questions for us. Ezekiel, can you hear me?
Yes, okay, I'm listening to you guys. It's actually a great section. I really enjoyed everything our guests have said so far. Able to learn a lot of things about child labor and street begging, especially here in Borno State. Some of the policies and some of the guidelines that are already in place to able to mitigate it. And so far in the program, we have had no questions today, which is actually
Okay.
surprising. But yeah, we don't have any questions today. But a lot of people have expressed their reactions in liking and also loving the session. So you guys did a great job. I really appreciate you. Our guests really appreciate you for all you have done for us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Okay.
much,
Yeah.
Ezekiel. You are
Yeah,
welcome.
thank you.
Yeah. So
Okay, you got
thank
you
you,
can go on.
Ezekiel.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Ezekiel, for that. And Yahuza, it's good to have you. I'm really excited to speak about child labor and street begging. So I'm looking forward to see that. I'll still bring you on board. Let's elaborate more on this street begging and child labor, because this is the issue that I see right now we are facing in Meduguri. And this issue of street begging and child labor do a lot of harms, because these children sometimes go out of their way. Sometimes there are a lot of pickpockets in the streets. A lot of people are their phones are being missing. A lot of stolen items in container theft. And so these are the causes of street begging and child labor. So I look forward to have you again, and thank you so much for elaborating on this. On behalf of Zekawis, we are really grateful on that. So before we end this section, I want you to give us a call to action, a last word about street begging and child labor.
Okay, well, thank you so much once again, Zegcawis team, most especially Refkatullah for actually inviting me to join this wonderful session and wonderful call. So, what I wanted to say here is that whenever we talk around street begging and child labor, we don't even have to think that the stakeholders are the only people that need to address these issues. Who are the stakeholders? We are the stakeholders. I am part of the stakeholders. We are part of the stakeholders. I think we can all play a role in addressing the issue of child labor. And for me, working in an organization who work towards enhancing service delivery to empower citizens for them to have access to the basic need of life. I think this is a great opportunity for each and every one of us here to contribute his quota in addressing the impact of child labor and also street begging in our street. Sometimes people are being engaged or exposed into child labor or street begging as a result of a very small issue or small thing. Some are falling to be the victim as a result of what ignorance, while others don't even know or realize some of the impact or consequences of child labor. So I think each and every person here has a role to play in creating awareness, in engaging people for them to realize and know the impact and consequences of the child labor across our various communities, be it in rural communities, be it in urban communities. We can all leverage and use our channels to engage other people for them to realize the impact. I know a lot of people that are being engaged into child labor, which was the reason why they are being deprived access for them to continue with their education. I know a lot of people that were unable to actually have access to some of the education as a result of the way they are being engaged and exposed to a lot of harms, a lot of dangers across the communities. So I would like to call the attention of each and every person, be it a national organization, INGO, to please support young people and women across our communities for them to have access to their basic need of life. When we are able to address that, we are going to mitigate the harm of child labor and impact of street begging across Borno State at large. And we should also promote inclusion of people with disability. When we look at it, people with disability are usually engaging into street begging, most especially around some of the communities. When I look at other documentary videos, I think there was a country which I was looking at a video whereby a person who was a person with disability, he used his I think he used his arm, something like that, for him to write, but he was able to pursue his master's degree, whereby he is currently planning to work in some of the government parastatal. So they says disability, there is ability in disability. So let's please try as much as we can to be engaging and including people with disability into our activity programming, so that they can have something to provide. They need to provide food to their table. Some of them have family, they have children, they have kids, they paid for their school fees, they paid for their food, electricity, they pay for house rent and many more. So by so doing, I think we are also going to address that. Then the last other thing I wanted to talk around is climate change. When we look around the issue of climate change, it has affected almost every sector of our engagement as a human beings. And addressing the climate change, I think, is each and every person's role and responsibility for us to work towards seeing how we can address the issue of climate change. With the impact of climate change, it affects our businesses, it affects our a lot of things. When we look at our farming systems, our seasons of farming and many more is being changed, not as it is before. When we look at the variation we are having in rainfall, it's actually affecting our yield, which is actually directly or indirectly contributing to our agricultural yield that leads to famine. And whenever we have famine in the country, it's more than natural. I'm sorry, it's more than insurgency. I think the level of people who will engage in street begging activities and child labor is going to be very rampant. So when we are able to address and work towards ensuring we have a sustainable environment and having an eco-friendly businesses and sustainable activities across our environment, I think we can be able to address and mitigate all this. People can go back to some of their normal way of living, going back to some of the shores of Lake Chad to continue with their farming activities, fishing activities, and many more. So I think when we are able to do that, we can be able to address and have a wider impact and mitigate the impact of street begging and child labor. Thank you, and over to you.
Yeah, yeah, thank you so much for this. Thank you very much on this. And to our audience, we all have a collective role and a quota to play in addressing street begging and child labor. If we see in our community, we have people that are engaging in child labor and street begging, we should be able to raise awareness and give them the impact and the effects of street begging and child labor. I'm talking about climate change. When you just said about climate change, I just wrote it. I wonder. I think in one of these our weekly series, we'll look at the climate change because one of the issue that is also affecting us is also climate change. So thank you so much. I think you have given me an idea on the topic that I will speak on and in our coming series. So thank you so much for that. Yahuza, have a great night rest. And to our audience, thank you so much for listening. I look forward to see us all next week. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Rafkat.
Thank you.